Have you ever seen someone celebrate a victory before the game was even over? Picture this: a packed courtroom, the air thick with tension. On one side, a young, glamorous mistress is flashing a diamond the size of a quail egg, smirking at the cameras, convinced she's about to walk away with half a fortune. On the other side, a wife, silent, stoic, dressed in black. Everyone thought she was defeated. Everyone thought she was done. But they didn't know what she had in her purse. They didn't know that the diamond ring was a trap, and the paper she was about to pull out would turn a $100 million divorce into a criminal investigation. This isn't just a story about cheating. It's a masterclass in revenge. Let's get into the destruction of Preston Sterling. Genevieve Sterling was the kind of woman who didn't just enter a room. She changed its temperature. At 42, she was the picture of old money elegance, the kind that whispered rather than shouted. She was the CEO of Sterling & Company, a boutique interior design firm that catered exclusively to the Hamptons elite and Manhattan's upper crust. Her husband, Preston Sterling, was the face of the operation's real estate arm. He was charismatic 50 and possessed the sort of silver fox charm that made investors open their checkbooks and young women lower their guard. For 15 years, they were the golden couple of the Upper East Side. They attended the Met Gala, they chaired the charity boards, and they hosted the 4th of July party in Sag Harbor that everyone who was anyone killed to get an invite to. But the rot had set in long ago. It started, as these things often do, with a late night at the office. Then a business trip to Dubai. Genevieve wasn't naive. She knew Preston loved the adoration of others almost as much as he loved money. She had looked the other way for minor dalliances, a flirtatious assistant here, a cocktail waitress there. They were meaningless. But Tiffany LaRue was different. Tiffany was 24, an influencer, with 2 million followers and a hunger for fame that bordered on starvation. She had met Preston at a luxury car launch in Miami. She wasn't subtle. She was loud. She was vibrant, and she posted everything. It wasn't long before the tabloids caught wind. Page 6 ran the photos, Preston and Tiffany on a yacht in Saint-Tropez. Preston buying Tiffany a Bentley. Preston and Tiffany looking at penthouses in Tribeca. Genevieve saw the photos while sitting in her breakfast nook sipping Earl Grey tea. She didn't cry. She didn't throw the iPad across the room. She simply zoomed in on the photo of the penthouse. It was a property owned by her family, trust technically. Preston was showing her mistress her building. That was the first mistake. The second mistake came 3 months later, when Preston came home reeking of expensive perfume and cheap audacity and asked for a divorce. "It's not you, gentle," he had the nerve to say, loosening his silk tie. "It's just, life is short. Tiffany makes me feel alive. I deserve to be happy." "You deserve to be happy," Genevieve repeated, her voice flat. "And I suppose you think you deserve half the assets too." Preston chuckled, pouring himself a scotch. "Well, that's the law, isn't it? New York is an equitable distribution state. We built this empire together. It's only fair." He looked at her with a pitying expression. He thought she was weak. He thought she was the quiet designer who picked out drapes while he closed the deals. He had forgotten that before she was a Sterling, she was a Van der Hoeven. And the Van der Hoevens didn't get mad. They got even. "Very well, Preston," she said, standing up and smoothing her skirt. "If you want a war, make sure you bring enough ammunition." Preston laughed as she walked upstairs. He texted Tiffany 5 minutes later. "She's folding. We're going to be rich." The divorce trial of Sterling versus Sterling was dubbed the trial of the century by the gossip blogs. It had everything: money betrayal and a mistress who treated the courthouse steps like a runway. On the first day of proceedings, the humidity in New York was stifling, but that didn't stop the paparazzi. They swarmed the entrance of the Supreme Court of New York County. Tiffany LaRue arrived first. She stepped out of a black SUV wearing a white dress that was arguably too short for a nightclub, let alone a court of law. She wore oversized sunglasses and, most notably, a ring. It wasn't just a ring. It was a boulder, a 10-carat emerald-cut yellow diamond that caught the sunlight and blinded the photographers. It was a promise ring she had claimed on Instagram the night before. A promise of the future Mrs. Sterling. Tiffany, is it true Preston promised you the Hamptons house? A reporter shouted. Tiffany lowered her sunglasses, flashed a dazzling, predatory smile, and raised her left hand, wiggling her fingers. We're just here to get what's rightfully ours, she cooed. Love wins, guys. Love always wins. 10 minutes later, Genevieve arrived. The contrast was jarring. She arrived in a modest town car. She wore a tailored navy suit, high-necked and severe. Her hair was pulled back in a tight chignon. She wore no jewelry except for a simple pair of pearl earrings. She walked past the screaming reporters without blinking, her eyes fixed on the heavy brass doors of the courthouse. Inside the courtroom was packed. Preston sat at the plaintiff's table, looking tan and confident. He whispered something to his lawyer, Donovan Reed, a man known as the Bulldog, for his aggressive tactics. Reed was the kind of lawyer who wore pinstripes and shouted objections just to hear his own voice. Genevieve sat alone at the defense table. Her lawyer, Harrison Caldwell, was late. Where is he? Preston sneered across the aisle. Did he realize you can't afford him anymore? Tiffany, sitting in the front row of the gallery, a breach of protocol, but the judge had allowed it, giggled. She snapped a selfie with the judge's bench in the background, captioning it, "Justice is served hot." Suddenly, the heavy doors at the back of the room swung open. Harrison Caldwell walked in. He was an older man, disheveled, carrying a battered leather briefcase that looked like it had survived both world wars. He didn't look like a shark. He looked like a librarian who had lost his glasses. Apologies, Your Honor, Harrison mumbled, dropping a stack of papers on the table. Traffic on the FDR. Judge Marilyn Kwan, a no-nonsense woman with zero tolerance for theatrics, banged her gavel. Let's get this show on the road. Mr. Reed, your opening statement. Donovan Reed stood up, buttoning his jacket. He paced before the judge, gesturing grandly. Your Honor, this is a simple case, Reed began, his voice booming. My client, Preston Sterling, has spent the last 15 years building a real estate empire. He has generated over $200 million in revenue. His wife, while a talented decorator, was merely a beneficiary of his hard work. We are asking for a 50-50 split of all marital assets, including the Sag Harbor estate, the Tribeca penthouse, and the accumulated stock portfolio. Furthermore, we are asking for spousal support, given that Mr. Sterling will need to maintain the lifestyle to which he has become accustomed. A murmur went through the crowd. Spousal support. For the cheater. Reed continued. We have evidence that Mrs. Sterling has been hiding assets. We believe she is trying to defraud my client of his fair share. Preston nodded solemnly, looking like a wounded puppy. When it was Harrison Caldwell's turn, he didn't stand up. He didn't pace. He simply adjusted his reading glasses and looked at the judge. Your Honor, Harrison said softly, the defense disputes all claims, and we would like to call our first witness, Ms. Tiffany LaRue. The courtroom gasped. Tiffany froze. Preston looked confused. "On what grounds?" Reed shouted. "She's not on trial here. She is a material witness regarding the dissipation of marital assets," Harrison said calmly, "and regarding the ownership of certain jewelry." Judge Kwan narrowed her eyes. "Allow it. Miss LaRue, take the stand." Tiffany stood up, smoothing her dress. She strutted to the stand, clearly loving the attention. She took the oath, her hand resting on the Bible, her diamond ring sparkling under the fluorescent lights. Harrison Caldwell walked up to the witness stand. He looked at her, then at the ring, then back at her. "Ms. LaRue?" He started, his voice deceptively kind. "That is a magnificent piece of jewelry you are wearing." Tiffany beamed. "Thank you. It's a symbol of Preston's love." "I see. And when did you receive this symbol?" "Last week, for our 6-month anniversary." 6 months, Harrison repeated. "And do you know how much this ring cost?" "I don't ask about prices," Tiffany said haughtily. "But I know it's worth $250,000. $260,000 to be exact," Harrison corrected, looking at a piece of paper. "Paid for from the joint account of Preston and Genevieve Sterling. Is that correct?" Preston shifted in his seat. "I don't know about bank accounts," Tiffany scoffed. "Preston bought it for me. It's a gift. It's mine." "Of course," Harrison said. He turned to the gallery. "A gift. Tell me, Ms. LaRue, are you aware that under New York law, gifts purchased with marital funds during a contested divorce are considered dissipation of assets and can be clawed back?" Tiffany blinked. "Clawed? What it means," Harrison said, his voice hardening. "That ring doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the estate. And by flashing it around town, you have provided us with physical evidence of Mr. Sterling's financial misconduct." Tiffany looked at Preston. Preston looked at his lawyer. "Objection," Reed yelled. "Relevance." "I'm getting there," Harrison said. "Ms. LaRue, did Mr. Sterling also promise you the Sag Harbor house?" "Yes," she said defiantly. "He said we're going to raise our kids there." A hush fell over the room. Kids Genevieve at the defense table finally looked up. Her expression was unreadable, but her hands were clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. "I see," Harrison said. "And did Mr. Sterling tell you who holds the deed to the Sag Harbor house?" "He does. He's the man of the house." Harrison smiled. It was a cold, terrifying smile. No further questions for this witness. As Tiffany stepped down, confused and irritated, Harrison turned to the judge. "Your Honor, before we proceed with the division of assets, I would like to submit Defense Exhibit A." He reached into his battered briefcase. He didn't pull out a folder. He pulled out a single yellowed piece of parchment paper, sealed in a protective plastic sleeve. Preston frowned. He leaned over to Reed. "What is that?" "I don't know," Reed whispered. "We requested all documents in discovery. They never sent that." Harrison walked to the bench and handed the document to the judge. Then he walked over to the plaintiff's table and dropped a copy in front of Preston. "Mr. Sterling," Harrison said, his voice ringing through the silent courtroom. "Do you recognize your signature?" Preston looked at the paper. His face went pale, then grey, then a sickly shade of green. It was a document dated 15 years and 2 days ago. "This," Preston stammered, "this isn't possible. I burned this." The microphone caught his whisper. The entire courtroom heard it. "You burned a copy." Genevieve spoke for the first time. Her voice was clear, melodic, and cut through the air like a knife. She stood up, towering over the table. "You burned the copy you found in my safe 3 years ago, Preston, but you forgot something. My father was a judge. He taught me never to keep the original in the house." "What is this?" Tiffany shrieked from the gallery. "What is happening?" Harrison Caldwell turned to the room. "Your Honor, this is a prenuptial agreement signed by Preston Sterling and Genevieve van der Hoven, but it is not a standard prenup. It contains an infidelity and moral turpitude clause, specifically Clause 14b. Harrison paused for dramatic effect. Clause 14b states that in the event of proven infidelity resulting in public scandal or the dissipation of assets on a paramour, the cheating spouse forfeits all claim to marital assets. Furthermore, Harrison looked directly at Tiffany. It states that any third party who knowingly participates in the dissipation of these assets is liable for civil damages. Preston stood up, shaking. "That's not enforceable. That was signed under duress." "Duress?" Genevieve laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "You signed it because my father told you it was the only way you'd ever get a cent of the seed money to start your real estate firm. You signed it because you were greedy, Preston, and you forgot about it because you were arrogant." "The ring," Harrison said, pointing at Tiffany. "The cars, the trips, under the terms of this agreement, those are considered stolen property." Judge Kwan looked at the document, then at Preston. "Mr. Reed, is this your client's signature?" Reed was flipping through the document, sweating profusely. I need a recess, Your Honor. I have never seen this." "You have 10 minutes, Judge Kwan said, banging the gavel. But the drama was just beginning. Because what Harrison Caldwell hadn't mentioned yet, what even Genevieve had kept close to her chest until this exact moment, was that the prenup wasn't the only thing in that briefcase. There was a USB drive, and on that drive was not just proof of cheating. It was proof of where Preston had actually been getting his money for the last 5 years. And it wasn't from selling houses. The 10-minute recess stretched into 20, then 30. The hallway outside courtroom 302 was a theater of war. On one end, near the water fountains, Preston Sterling was cornered. His face, usually a mask of tanned, practiced confidence, was now splotchy and red. He was jabbing a finger into Donovan Reed's chest. "You said it was ironclad," Preston hissed, his voice cracking. "You said after 10 years, prenups are thrown out. You said she lost the original. I said it was likely." Donovan shot back, wiping sweat from his receding hairline. "I didn't know she had a moral turpitude clause, Preston. Who even writes that into a contract anymore? That's something from the 1950s. My father-in-law," Preston spat. "That old bat never trusted me." Standing a few feet away, Tiffany LaRue was frantically scrolling through her phone. She wasn't looking up legal definitions of dissipation of assets. She was deleting Instagram posts. The photo of the Bentley gone, the video tour of the Sag Harbor pool house deleted, the future Mrs. Sterling highlight reel archived. She looked up, her eyes wide with a dawning selfish panic. "Preston," she whined, tugging on his sleeve. "They can't actually take the ring, right? It's a gift. Possession is 9/10 of the law." Preston whipped around, his eyes wild. "Shut up, Tiffany, just shut up for 1 second. I'm losing $50 million right now, and you're worried about a rock." Tiffany recoiled as if slapped. She wasn't used to Preston raising his voice at her. He was supposed to be her sugar daddy, her ticket to the A-list, not a desperate man, sweating through his Italian suit. At the other end of the hall, Genevieve stood by the window looking out at the grey Manhattan skyline. She was perfectly still. Harrison Caldwell stood beside her, eating a granola bar from his pocket. "He's going to try to settle," Harrison said, chewing thoughtfully. "He knows the prenup holds water. He'll offer you the Sag Harbor house if you let him keep the business." Genevieve turned to him, a small, cold smile playing on her lips. He thinks the business is still his to keep. He really hasn't figured it out yet, has he? No, Harrison chuckled. He hasn't. Good, she whispered. Let him burn. When the bailiff called everyone back inside, the atmosphere had shifted. The air was heavy electric. The reporters in the back row had their pens poised, sensing blood. Judge Kwan banged her gavel. We are back on the record. Mr. Reed regarding Defense Exhibit A. Donovan Reed stood up, looking defeated. Your Honor, while we contest the validity of the signature due to the time elapsed, my client is willing to discuss a settlement regarding the residential properties. We are not interested in a settlement, Harrison Caldwell interrupted, standing up slowly. Preston's head snapped up. What? We are not interested, Harrison repeated, because the division of assets is no longer the primary issue. The issue, Your Honor, is the source of the funds used to purchase those assets. Harrison walked back to his table and picked up the USB drive. He held it up like a holy relic. Your Honor, before the break, we discussed the ring, a purchase of $260,000. Mr. Sterling claimed this came from his earnings as a real estate developer. Defense Exhibit B will show that this is false. Objection, Reed shouted. This is a divorce court, not a forensic audit. It goes to the heart of the marital estate's value, Judge Kwan ruled. Overruled. Proceed, Mr. Caldwell. Harrison plugged the drive into the court's presentation laptop. A spreadsheet projected onto the large screen on the wall. It was a complex web of numbers, dates, and wire transfers. This, Harrison pointed to a column highlighted in red, is the operating account for Sterling and Company, real estate. And this, he pointed to a column in blue, is a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands called Blue Horizon Consulting. Preston went rigid. He stopped breathing. For the last 5 years, Harrison explained, his voice taking on a storytelling cadence. Genevieve Sterling noticed that the firm's profits were stagnating despite a booming market. Preston told her it was overhead. Costs of doing business. Inflation. Harrison clicked a button. The screen changed to show a series of wire transfers. But the truth is Mr. Sterling was siphoning money. He was taking deposits from clients, down payments for luxury condos, and moving them into Blue Horizon. He would then clean the money by paying out consulting fees to various entities. Harrison turned to look at Tiffany, who was chewing her fingernail in the witness box. Ms. LaRue, Harrison said, have you ever heard of a company called TSL Creative Solutions? Tiffany blinked. I have a brand. I do consulting for social media. Indeed, Harrison said. And did you perform $50,000 worth of social media consulting for Sterling and Company in January of last year? Tiffany looked at Preston. He was staring at the table, refusing to meet her eyes. I post about his listings, sometimes, she stammered. $50,000 for an Instagram post, Harrison asked, and another $40,000 in February, and $100,000 in March. The gallery gasped. Ms. LaRue. Harrison's voice dropped an octave, becoming deadly serious. These checks were deposited into an account with your name on it. If you performed no services for this money, do you know what that makes you? Tiffany shook her head, terrified. It makes you a co-conspirator in embezzlement and fraud. No! Tiffany shrieked, jumping up. I didn't do anything. He told me it was my allowance. He said he had to put it through the business for taxes I didn't know. Order. Judge Kwan banged the gavel. Ms. LaRue, sit down. He told me to sign the papers. Tiffany was hysterical. now pointing a manicured finger at Preston. He said it was just a way to pay for the apartment without his wife seeing the withdrawals. I didn't know it was illegal. Preston finally stood up, his face purple. She's lying. She begged for that money. She threatened to tell Genevieve if I didn't pay her. Oh, so you admit you paid her? Harrison interjected smoothly. Preston froze. He realized too late that he had just walked into the trap. Genevieve sat at the defense table, her hands folded calmly in her lap. She wasn't just divorcing him. She was dismantling him, piece by piece. The courtroom was in chaos. Judge Kwan was banging her gavel so hard it threatened to crack the wood. Order, order in this court, or I will have the bailiffs clear the room. Silence slowly returned, but it was a jagged, fragile silence. The air smelled of expensive perfume and imminent ruin. Mr. Caldwell, Judge Kwan said, her voice tight with restrained anger. You have made serious allegations. Do you have proof that these funds were misappropriated from client accounts? I do, Your Honor, Harrison said. He clicked the remote again. The screen displayed a copy of a check. It was a cashier's check for $260,000 made out to Cartier. This is the check used to buy the engagement ring Ms. LaRue is currently wearing, Harrison said. Note the account number in the bottom left. He clicked again. A bank statement appeared. This is the escrow account for the Vanderbilt penthouse sale. A client, a Mrs. Agnes Miller, deposited $2 million as a down payment. 3 days later, $260,000 was wired out to pay for a diamond ring. The room went dead silent. Even the reporters stopped typing. Stealing from a spouse was one thing. Stealing from an escrow account. That was the third rail of real estate. That was immediate loss of license. That was federal prison. Harrison turned to Preston. Mr. Sterling, did you or did you not use Mrs. Miller's escrow money to purchase a ring for your mistress? Preston slumped in his chair. He looked small. The Silver Fox charm had evaporated, leaving behind a sweaty, desperate middle-aged man. I was going to put it back, Preston whispered. I had a deal closing in Brooklyn. I was going to replace the funds before the closing date. It was a bridge loan. A bridge loan, Harrison mocked. Without the client's consent. That's not a loan, Mr. Sterling. That's grand larceny. Harrison then turned his attention back to Tiffany. She looked like a trapped animal. She was twisting the giant diamond ring on her finger, her breathing shallow. Ms. LaRue, Harrison said, you claimed earlier that this ring was yours, that it was a gift. Do you still wish to claim ownership of stolen property? Tiffany looked down at the ring. Suddenly it didn't look like a trophy. It looked like a handcuff. I want to take it off, she said, her voice trembling. She tugged at the ring. It was tight. Her fingers had swollen from the heat and the stress. I can't get it off. Leave it on for now, Harrison said coldly. It's evidence. He walked back to the defense table and leaned against it, crossing his arms. Your Honor, my client Genevieve Sterling has been the CFO of Sterling & Co. in title only. Mr. Sterling went to great lengths to hide the books from her. However, 3 months ago, Mrs. Sterling hired a private forensic accountant. Genevieve stood up. She looked at Preston with eyes that were void of any love that might have once existed. I trusted you, Preston, she said, her voice carrying to the back of the room. Not with my heart. I knew that was a lost cause years ago. But I trusted you with my family's legacy, with our reputation. She reached into her purse. Preston flinched, as if he expected her to pull out a gun. Instead, she pulled out a cell phone. Your Honor, Genevieve addressed the judge. While Mr. Sterling was busy hiding assets in the Cayman Islands, he was careless with his digital footprint. He synced his phone to the cloud account that is shared with the family iPad. Preston's eyes widened. "I have text messages," Genevieve continued, "between Preston and Ms. LaRue." "Objection, privacy violation," Reed shouted, but his heart wasn't in it. "It's a joint account, Your Honor," Harrison countered. "There is no expectation of privacy." "Read them," Judge Kwan ordered. Genevieve scrolled to a specific date. "January 14th, she read. "Preston writes, just moved the Miller money. It's risky, but we need the cash for the remodel on the penthouse. If Jen finds out I'm dead." She looked at Tiffany. And Ms. LaRue replied, "I don't care where it comes from, baby. Just get me that walk-in closet. And make sure you hide it better this time. Make up a fake invoice." Tiffany gasped. "I didn't mean—" "I was joking." "Joking about money laundering?" Harrison asked. The gallery erupted. This was the nail in the coffin. Tiffany wasn't just a passive recipient. She was an active participant. She knew the money was dirty. She had encouraged him to hide it. Tiffany stood up, her face streaked with mascara tears. "He made me send that. He said it was role play. He said it was sexy to pretend we were criminals, like Bonnie and Clyde." "Well," Judge Kwan said dryly, leaning over the bench. "Congratulations, Ms. LaRue. You got your wish." The judge turned to the bailiff. "Officer, please secure the courtroom doors. Nobody leaves." She looked at Preston, then at Tiffany. "Mr. Caldwell, I assume you have turned this evidence over to the district attorney." "We sent the file over this morning, Your Honor." Harrison smiled. "I believe they are waiting in the lobby." Preston put his head in his hands. He began to sob ugly, heaving sobs that echoed off the mahogany walls. But Genevieve wasn't done. She hadn't just come here to send him to jail. She had come here to ensure that when he eventually got out, he would have absolutely nothing to come back to. "Your Honor," Harrison said, "there is one more matter regarding the prenuptial agreement. Clause 15. C." Preston looked up through his tears. "There's more. Clause 15. C," Harrison recited without looking at the paper. "The scorched earth provision. In the event of criminal activity that damages the reputation of the Vanderhoven family name, the offending spouse agrees to grant full power of attorney to the injured spouse for the purpose of liquidation and restitution." Harrison looked at Preston. "It means, Mr. Sterling, that as of this moment, Genevieve is not just your wife. She is your legal guardian regarding all financial matters. She controls your bank accounts, your stocks, and your shares in the company. She controls your defense fund." Preston's mouth fell open. She controls my lawyer." Donovan Reed looked at Genevieve. Then he looked at Preston. He started packing his briefcase. "I think I'm going to have to recuse myself," Reed muttered. "Conflict of interest. And I doubt the check is going to clear." Genevieve walked over to the plaintiff's table. She stood inches from Preston. "I'm going to sell everything, Preston," she whispered. "The firm, the boat, the cars, even your watch. I'm going to use every penny to pay back Mrs. Miller and the other clients you stole from. I will restore my family name." "And what about me?" Preston wept. "What do I get?" Genevieve reached into her purse one last time. She pulled out a $10 bill and dropped it on the table in front of him. "Cab fare," she said. "If you hurry, you might beat the police to the sidewalk, but I doubt it." But just as the bailiffs moved to take control of the situation, the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. It wasn't the police. It was a woman, an older woman, dressed in a tweed suit that cost more than most people's cars, leaning on a cane with a silver handle. The entire room froze. Even Genevieve looked surprised. "Mother," Genevieve breathed. It was Beatrice van der Hoven, the matriarch of the family. A woman who hadn't left her Upper East Side townhouse in 5 years. And she wasn't alone. Walking behind her was a young man holding a stack of files. "Nobody is going to jail just yet," Beatrice announced, her voice trembling with age, but steel hard with authority. "Not until I find out what happened to the emeralds." Preston's face went from pale to a terrified, ghostly white. The embezzlement was one thing, the prenup was another. But the emeralds referred to the van der Hoven family heirlooms, jewels that were supposed to be in a vault in Switzerland. Genevieve looked at Preston. "Preston, you didn't." He had, and the story was about to get much, much darker. The courtroom previously, a buzz of whispers and typing had fallen into a silence so profound it felt heavy. Beatrice van der Hoven, 80 years old, and arguably one of the most powerful women in New York society, did not move quickly. She moved with the slow, terrifying inevitability of a glacier. She stopped at the defense table. She didn't look at her daughter Genevieve. She looked straight at Preston. "Hello, Preston," Beatrice said. Her voice was like dry leaves crushing underfoot. "You look unwell." Preston was gripping the edge of the table so hard, his knuckles were white. "Beatrice, I didn't know you were coming." "Clearly," she replied. She turned to the judge. "Marilyn, it's been a long time." Judge Kwan nodded respectfully. "It has, Mrs. van der Hoven. Though I must remind you, this is a closed courtroom, and you are not a party to this divorce." "I am not here for the divorce," Beatrice said, leaning on her silver-handled cane. "I am here for the robbery." She gestured to the young man behind her. "This is Sebastian Cole, the curator of the Van der Hoven Family Trust. Sebastian, show them the photographs." Sebastian, a sharp-faced man in a charcoal suit, stepped forward and handed a folder to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. 3 days ago, Beatrice addressed the room. "I asked Sebastian to retrieve the Van der Hoven parure from our vault in Zurich. My granddaughter is turning 18 next month, and it is tradition for the women of our family to wear the emeralds on their debut." Genevieve stood up slowly. "Mother, the vault was empty." "Not empty," Beatrice corrected. "There were boxes, but inside the boxes were fakes, paste, glass." She turned her gaze on Preston. It was a look of pure, unadulterated loathing. "High-quality replicas," Beatrice continued, "the kind that would fool a casual observer. But they didn't fool Sebastian. And when we checked the access logs, we found that only 2 people had visited that vault in the last 5 years. Me and you, Preston." Preston wiped sweat from his forehead. I went to check on the insurance appraisals. That's all. I don't know what happened to the real stones. Maybe the bank employees—" "Stop it," Genevieve said. Her voice was quiet, broken. "Just stop lying, Preston. It's pathetic." "I'm not lying," Preston shouted, his voice cracking. "Why would I take the emeralds? I have money, I have the business." "You had the business," Harrison Caldwell reminded him from the side. "But you were hemorrhaging money into that shell company. You needed more." Beatrice tapped her cane on the floor to silence them. "I am not interested in his excuses," Beatrice said. "I am interested in my property. The necklace, the bracelet, and the earrings." She slowly turned her head toward the witness stand, toward Tiffany LaRue. Tiffany had been watching this exchange with wide, confused eyes. She felt safe for a moment, as the heat was off her and on to Preston. But now the old woman was looking at her, and more specifically, she was looking at Tiffany's ears. Tiffany was wearing a pair of long, dangling earrings. They were vintage in style, platinum, encrusted with small diamonds, leading down to 2 large, teardrop-shaped green stones. "Those are lovely earrings, my dear," Beatrice said pleasantly. "Where did you get them?" Tiffany's hand flew to her ear. "These Preston gave them to me, for Christmas." "Did he tell you they were costume jewelry?" Beatrice asked. "Or perhaps vintage finds from a flea market?" "He said they were from an estate sale," Tiffany said, her voice trembling. "He said they were tourmaline." "Tourmaline," Beatrice repeated with a scoff. "Preston, you truly have no appreciation for history." Beatrice walked slowly, painfully, right up to the witness stand. The bailiff made a move to stop her, but Judge Kwan held up a hand. The judge wanted to see where this went. Beatrice peered closely at the earrings. "Sebastian," she called out. "The inclusion on the left drop. Is it there?" Sebastian stepped up, pulling a jeweler's loop from his pocket. He leaned in, invading Tiffany's personal space. Tiffany froze, too terrified to move. Sebastian looked through the loop at the green stone. "Yes, Mrs. Vanderhoven," Sebastian announced. "The jardin, the specific inclusion pattern of the Colombian mines, and the setting, I recognize the maker's mark. It's been modified, the top cluster was changed, but the main stones, these are the Vanderhoven earrings." The courtroom erupted. "Silence!" Judge Kwan bellowed. "You stole my mother's earrings," Genevieve screamed, losing her composure for the first time. She looked at Preston with wild eyes. "Those belonged to my grandmother. They survived the Great Depression. They survived the war, and you gave them to her." She pointed a shaking finger at Tiffany. Tiffany looked like she was going to be sick. She hurriedly unclasped the earrings, fumbling with the backs, and threw them onto the judge's bench as if they were burning hot coals. "I didn't know," Tiffany sobbed. "I swear I didn't know. He told me they were $500. He said he got a deal." "And the necklace," Beatrice demanded, ignoring Tiffany's tears. She turned back to Preston. "The earrings are a trifle compared to the necklace. The centerpiece is a 40-carat Mughal emerald. Where is it, Preston?" Preston had sunk so low in his chair, he was almost under the table. He looked destroyed. I don't have it," he whispered. "Who has it?" Harrison Caldwell barked. Preston looked up, and for the first time, there was real fear in his eyes. Not fear of the judge, or his wife, or jail, but fear for his life. "I can't say," Preston said. "If I say, they'll kill me." "Mr. Sterling," Judge Kwan said, leaning forward, "you are already looking at 20 years for embezzlement and grand larceny. If you add trafficking in stolen goods, you will never see the outside of a prison cell again. However, if you cooperate to recover the assets, the district attorney might be lenient." Preston looked at the doors as if expecting a hitman to burst through. "I owed money," Preston confessed, his voice barely audible. "Gambling debts, big ones, underground poker games in Atlantic City. I got in deep, 2 million, then 5. "So you stole from the business," Genevieve said. "It wasn't enough," Preston cried. "The interest, it kept compounding. They threatened to hurt you, Jen. They threatened to burn down the Sag Harbor house. "So you stole my family's heritage to pay off a loan shark?" Genevieve asked, her voice icy. "I gave them the necklace as collateral," Preston blubbered. "I was supposed to buy it back next month. I had a deal closing. I was going to get it back. And the bracelet," Beatrice asked. Preston went silent. He looked at Tiffany. Everyone looked at Tiffany. Tiffany stopped crying. She went very still. "Preston," Tiffany said slowly, "you told me the bracelet was in the safe deposit box, the one you opened in my name." Preston closed his eyes. Harrison Caldwell smiled. "LaRue, are you telling the court that there is a safe deposit box registered in your name containing more stolen Van der Hoven jewelry?" Tiffany looked at Preston, then at the terrifying figure of Beatrice, then at the police officers waiting by the door. Self-preservation kicked in. "I have the key," Tiffany said loudly. "It's in my purse. I can take you to it." "You traitorous little—" Preston lunged across the aisle. The bailiffs were on him in a second. They slammed him down onto the table, handcuffing his hands behind his back. "It's over, Preston," Genevieve said, watching him struggle. "It is finally over." But as they dragged Preston back to his seat, he began to laugh. It was a manic, unhinged sound. "You think it's over?" Preston spat his face pressed against the table. "You think you've won? You have no idea what you've unlocked, Jen. That necklace the guy I gave it to. He doesn't just want money. He collects trophies, and now that he knows you're coming for it, he's going to come for you." The threat hung in the air, toxic and chilling. "He's going to come for you." Judge Kwan was not intimidated. She was furious. "Officer, take Mr. Sterling into custody immediately," she ordered. "He is to be held without bail pending charges of grand larceny, embezzlement, and conspiracy. And get him out of my sight." As Preston was hauled away, kicking and screaming about dangerous men, the dynamic in the courtroom shifted. The villain was gone, but the mess remained. Beatrice Van der Hoven sat down in the chair Preston had just vacated. She looked tired. The adrenaline was fading. "Harrison," Beatrice said to the lawyer, "we need to get that necklace back, before this collector disappears with it." "We will, Beatrice," Harrison assured her. He turned to Tiffany, who was still on the stand, clutching her purse. "Ms. LaRue," Harrison said, "you are in a very precarious position. You are an accessory to all of these crimes. You held the stolen goods. You accepted the laundered money." "I want a deal," Tiffany blurted out. "I'll tell you everything. I'll tell you about the poker games. I'll tell you who the guy is." "We're listening," the district attorney, who had stepped forward from the back of the room, said. Tiffany took a deep breath. "His name is Victor. He runs a club in the meat-packing district. The Red Velvet. That's where Preston lost the money. That's where he gave him the necklace." Genevieve wrote the name down. "Victor." "And the bracelet?" Harrison asked. "It's at the bank, First National on 5th, box 402, Tiffany said. "There's cash in there too, about 50,000. And papers." "What kind of papers?" Genevieve asked, stepping closer. Tiffany looked down at her hands. Preston he was paranoid. He kept a journal. He wrote down everything, every bribe he paid to city inspectors to get his building permits approved, every kickback he took from contractors. It's all in the box. Genevieve looked at Harrison. This was the smoking gun. Not just for the divorce or the theft, but for the destruction of Preston's entire professional existence. With that journal, Sterling and Company real estate would be dissolved. The fines would be astronomical. "You did good, Tiffany," Harrison said, though his voice dripped with sarcasm. "Now I suggest you go with these officers. They're going to need a full statement." As Tiffany was led away, sans diamond ring, sans earrings, and sans dignity, Genevieve finally sat down. She felt hollow. "Are you all right?" Harrison asked gently. I was married to a monster, Genevieve whispered. 15 years, Harrison. I slept next to a man who was bribing officials, stealing from clients and pawning my grandmother's jewelry to Russian mobsters. How did I not see it? Because you are a good person, Harrison said, and good people possess a fatal flaw. They assume everyone else is good, too. Beatrice reached across the aisle and placed a gloved hand on Genevieve's arm. You are a van der Hoven, Beatrice said sternly. We do not wallow in self-pity. We clean up the mess. That is what we have always done. Genevieve took a deep breath and nodded. She stood up and smoothed her skirt. The tears were gone. The steel was back. You're right, Mother, she said. Harrison, what are the next steps? Well, Harrison said, checking his notes. With Preston in custody and the assets frozen, we trigger Clause 15C immediately. You have power of attorney. We liquidate his personal holdings to pay back Mrs. Miller and the other escrow accounts. That saves the firm from criminal liability, hopefully. And the necklace? Genevieve asked. The police will raid the Red Velvet Club tonight, the DA interjected. If Victor has it, we'll find it. And if he doesn't? Beatrice asked sharply. Then Genevieve said, her eyes narrowing, we hunt him down. The courtroom doors opened again. This time it wasn't a lawyer or a witness. It was the press. They had heard the commotion. They had seen Preston being dragged out in cuffs. They smelled the story of the decade. Ms. Sterling! Ms. Sterling! A reporter shouted from the doorway. Is it true? Preston embezzled millions. Is it true? The mistress turned on him. What do you have to say? Genevieve looked at Harrison. He nodded. She walked to the center of the room facing the open doors. She didn't hide. She didn't cover her face. She stood tall, the picture of dignity, amidst the wreckage. You can tell the world, Genevieve said, her voice clear and strong, that Sterling and Company is under new management, effective immediately. She turned to the bailiff. Can I have my marriage certificate back, please? I believe I'm done with it. The bailiff handed her the paper, the document that had started all of this, the shield that had saved her life. Genevieve looked at it one last time. Preston's signature, so bold and arrogant back then, now looked like the scratching of a desperate man. She folded it and put it in her purse. Come on, Mother, she said, offering her arm to Beatrice. Let's go get your necklace. They walked out of the courtroom, past the stunned reporters, past the sobbing mistress being questioned by the police, and out into the bright, harsh light of the New York afternoon. It wasn't a happy ending. Not yet. There were debts to settle, a business to rebuild, and a dangerous man named Victor to deal with. But as Genevieve stepped onto the sidewalk, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. She was free. The ring that Tiffany had flashed so arrogantly sat in an evidence bag on the DA's desk. The prenup sat in Genevieve's purse, and Preston sat in a holding cell, realizing that he had bet against the house, and the house had won. But the story wasn't quite over. Because late that night, as Genevieve sat in her study, reviewing the seized documents from the safe deposit box, her phone rang. It was an unknown number. Mrs. Sterling, a voice said, thick accent, deep, smooth. I believe you are looking for something green. Genevieve's grip on the phone tightened. Victor. Preston was a bad investment. The voice purred. But I am a businessman. I hear you are the one in charge now. If you want the Mughal emerald back, bring the journal, alone. The line went dead. Genevieve looked at the phone. Then she looked at the leather-bound journal on her desk, the one detailing years of corruption. She could give it to the police, and ruin Preston forever. Or she could trade it for her family's legacy. She picked up the journal. She picked up her keys. She didn't call the police. She didn't call Harrison. She was a Vander Hoven, and she was going to finish this herself. The Red Velvet Club was empty, save for the hum of neon lights and the smell of stale cigar smoke. Victor sat in a velvet booth, spinning the Mughal emerald necklace around his thick finger. Genevieve walked in. She wore a trench coat over her court suit, the leather journal clutched tight to her chest. She didn't tremble. "You have the book?" Victor asked, his voice a low rumble. "You have my heritage," Genevieve countered. Victor placed the necklace on the table. The emeralds glowed green in the dim light, 40 carats of history that Preston had traded for a few weeks of breathing room. Genevieve placed the journal on the table. Every bribe, every kickback, dates, names, amounts, it's all there, enough to put half the city council and you in prison. Victor laughed a dark, jagged sound. He snatched the book. "Smart woman. You protect your family name, I protect my business. A fair trade." He slid the necklace toward her. Genevieve picked it up, feeling the cold weight of the stones. She clasped it around her neck, the mechanism clicking shut with a sound like a pistol cocking. "Pleasure doing business, Mrs. Sterling." Victor grinned, flipping through the pages of incriminating evidence. "Now get out before I change my mind." Genevieve turned and walked to the door. Her heels clicked rhythmically on the hardwood. At the threshold, she paused and looked back. "Victor," she called out, "you should check the last page." Victor frowned. He flipped to the back of the journal. Stuck to the final page was a small yellow sticky note. It read, "Upload complete." Victor's eyes snapped up. "What is this?" Genevieve held up her phone. "I didn't call the police, Victor. I called the FBI. I told them I was making a drop. They've been listening to this entire conversation through the wire in my necklace." Outside, the wail of sirens pierced the night air. Red and blue lights flashed through the club windows, painting Victor's furious face in chaotic colors. "You didn't just steal my husband's money," Genevieve said, pushing the door open as the SWAT team stormed past her. "You tried to steal a Vander Hoven's dignity, and that is a debt that can only be paid in life sentences." She walked out into the cool night rain, the emeralds heavy and safe around her throat. She pulled her phone out and sent one final text to Harrison. "It's done. File the papers." The game was over. The mistress was broken. The husband was jailed. The mobsters was caught, and Genevieve Sterling. She was finally truly victorious. And just like that, Genevieve Sterling proved that you should never bring a knife to a gunfight or a diamond ring to a prenup battle. Preston thought he could play the system, but he forgot that the system was built by families like the Vander Hovens. He lost his fortune, his freedom, and his reputation, all because he underestimated his quiet wife. But that ending, chills right. Genevieve walking into the night to face a mobster alone. That is a woman who has nothing left to lose. What would you have done in her shoes? Would you have traded the evidence to get the family heirloom back? Or would you have let the police handle it? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this roller coaster of justice, revenge, and high-stakes drama, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss the next part of our real-life drama series. Thanks for watching.